Hey everyone, this is Derrick Broze of the Conscious Resistance Network, and today we're going to be talking about contact tracing. This is an evolving conversation. I've done several videos and an article about this, which we'll show you in just a moment, but I want to preface this with just saying that this is kind of an effort to fact check what's really going on with contact tracing. Can the apps really track you? Are the phones already tracking you? Some of you guys might have gotten recent updates on your phone. I know I got one recently showing me that on my Android phone I use for live streaming that it says there's a COVID-19 application in there, or there's something in there. What exactly is it? We're going to talk about that. But before we go any further, I want to remind you guys to bookmark theconsciousresistance.com, which is the website you're looking at right now. This is the home for all of my content, as well as the content for the rest of our team, the people who are a part of the Conscious Resistance Network. And by the way, if you're ever looking to join the team, we're always looking for more contributors. Essays, articles, vlogs, interviews. If you've got something to say and it's in line with our message of self-ownership, spiritual pursuit, self-exploration, mind exploration, etc., then please reach out. Also, I'd invite you guys to follow us on minds.com/the Conscious Resistance Network. Check us out over at Hive. You can find our Discord channel. Sign up for my text list, guys. This is the easiest way to get my work without relying on the controlled social media platforms. And if you don't want controlled social media platforms, hop over to float.app, where you can find us at Conscious Resistance. You can also find our videos on BitChute and at library.tv, LBRY.tv. And finally, if you want to support me, you can do so by going to patreon.com/Derrick Broze or purchasing some Kratom and CBD through My Brave Botanicals. All right, guys, let's get into this. So as I mentioned, I've done a couple of videos. One was just about a month ago called "Are You Willing to Give Up Your Smartphone for Liberty?" #contact tracing. And I go into the details of this article, which I wrote for The Last American Vagabond, called "We Need an Army of Contact Tracers. Meet the enforcement arm of the new normal." And it goes into what exactly contact tracing is, and I'll give you a brief summary for those who are not aware. Contact tracing is a process of identifying individuals who may have come into contact with an infected person, collecting information about their contacts, and then tracing the contacts of infected individuals. All persons who may have come into contact with an infected individual are tested for infection, treated for the infection, and their contacts are traced as well. Regarding the COVID-19 pandemic, we are seeing calls for digital contact tracing, using cell phones to notify individuals when they may have come into contact with an infected person or visited a hot spot of infection. Digital contact tracing apps use Bluetooth to track encounters, a move which is supposed to anonymize actual location data. Other forms of contact tracing apps involve the use of location data gathered from cellular networks. Now, you guys may know a couple of months ago, Apple and Google said they're going to partner up to develop new apps and to make it easier for other people, governments, local, state, and national governments, to develop their own apps. And that was back, I think, in March. And now these phones are using Bluetooth to warn app users, or this is the goal at least, to warn app users when they are near an infected person or a hotspot. And these programs will use data from Android and iPhone users who volunteer for the program. Jennifer Granick with the American Civil Liberties Union told Politico that the joint effort between tech companies, quote, appears to mitigate the worst privacy and centralization risks. However, she says there is still room for improvement. And I kind of go into this just to be fair. I want you guys to know that, allegedly Microsoft claims that they're collaborating with the University of Washington to promote a privacy-based contact tracing apps. Now, of course, we should also put some context here and remind you guys that Microsoft, of course, was one of the first companies to partner with the U.S. government, the NSA, on their PRISM program that was revealed by Edward Snowden. But now Microsoft is saying they're working with the University of Washington with volunteers from Microsoft to develop COVID Safe. And the researchers state that the app will alert users about potential exposure to COVID-19, but will supposedly do so without giving up anyone's privacy. And after that, we also have Coalition, a free contact tracing app designed to protect users' privacy and protect communities during the COVID-19 crisis. Coalition claims to utilize secure Bluetooth Low Energy, or BLE, and cryptography to protect a user's identity by generating random anonymous IDs. The app uses Coalition's Whisper Tracing, an open-source privacy-first protocol that randomizes a user's device identity and does not share ID information with the cloud. So, all that is to say that there are efforts to protect data and to try to make this as anonymous as possible. But still, the fact remains that using Bluetooth, they will, once the apps come out from the state or whoever else develops them, they will be able to have a history of your data and your location. Now, they claim that this doesn't have your name attached to it. It's going to be anonymous and it'll be destroyed. But as I mentioned, we've seen often, at least here in the United States, I know some of you guys are listening from elsewhere, we've seen in the United States and any of the Five Eyes nations, New Zealand, Australia, the UK, and the US, that they don't always keep their word. When they promise us that things are going to be safe, it doesn't always end up that way. So that's kind of where we're at, right? Is, again, what you've received on your phone, which let me see if I can pull it up somehow and show you guys. Actually, I probably won't be able to, but I'm sure you guys have seen it. There's you just go, let me just tell you how to do this. Go to your settings on your phone if you have an Android. Go down to, let's see, I'm looking at my phone as I'm telling you this. Go to settings, go to general, go to Google services, and then when you do that, it's going to open up your Google account, whatever you have plugged in, if you have it plugged in, which unfortunately many of us do. And then you go down there and it says COVID-19 exposure notifications, and you click it. And right now what I'm looking at, mine says this feature is off, turn on Bluetooth and location to use this feature. And it says to turn on COVID-19 exposure notifications, install or finish setting up a participating app. So this is my point, that an app has to be developed, and so far there really aren't many apps. I know that the Texas Department of Health doesn't have one, the US government doesn't have one. It seems like they're basically leaving it up to the states and to the local governments to develop their own apps. There's not like a US general one, but I do know that the UK government and others are developing them. And so as I'm looking at it, it says this app can notify you if you've been near someone who reported having COVID-19. The date, duration, and signal strength associated with any exposure will be shared with the app. Your phone uses Bluetooth to securely collect and share random IDs with other phones that are nearby. Random IDs are automatically deleted after 14 days. If you have COVID-19, you can choose to share your phone's random ID with the app so it can notify others anonymously. Device location needs to be on to detect Bluetooth devices near you. However, COVID-19 exposure does not use device location. So let's go through a couple of fact checks here, kind of mainstream. This is from the USA Today, and they're fact checking. Google did not automatically sign up Android users for COVID-19 tracing app. And this is what we're talking about, that there's been recent Facebook posts saying, Android users, beware, Google automatically signed you up to COVID-19 tracing app. Then, similar thing for iPhones. And like I said, there have been some updates. I know last week there was like a power outage where there was some cell phones not working, and there's a theory going around, this is when they were secretly installing our, the COVID-19 apps, check your phone. It's like, it's there. It's partially true that there is an update taking place, and it has taken place. And this, my friends, as we'll get to in just a moment, or actually let's step back here where I asked, are you willing to give up your smartphone for liberty? This is the thing, is as long as you're using an Android or iPhone, the updates are going to come automatically, and sooner or later you probably will be pushed into the system whether you like it or not. But as it stands, all they did was initiate an update, but there currently are no apps, at least in the United States. I'm not going to try to speak for the whole world, because we will get into some other states, some other nations in just a few moments that already are using apps. And guess what? Privacy problems are already showing up. So on May 20th, Apple and Google announced that COVID-19 exposure notifications, a mobile tool that allows for digital contact tracing, were available for iOS and Android. And that's what I was just reading to you from my phone. This new technology can track users who are in proximity of someone for at least 5 minutes who has tested positive. Participation is completely voluntary. Each user gets to decide whether or not to opt in to exposure notifications. The system does not collect or use location from the device, and if a person is diagnosed with COVID-19, it is up to them whether or not to report that in the public health app, Google and Apple said. The companies noted that strong privacy protections are also the best way to encourage use of these apps. Again, though, I would say take that all with a grain of salt, because we're talking about Google and Apple, so they don't have the best track record. And they explain it like this: with your consent, if you test positive for coronavirus, anyone who is near you within the last 14 days will get a notification on their smartphone that they have potentially been exposed. The notification will read, you have recently come into contact with someone who has tested positive for COVID-19. Tap for more information. So it goes on from here, and they talk about privacy concerns. And then let's go down here. Their rating says partly false. The claim that all Android smartphone users have been automatically signed up for a COVID-19 app is rated partly false because some of it was not supported by our research. Apple and Google did recently add exposure notifications to devices under settings, but the contact tracing technology works only if one has opted and enabled the notifications. Apple and Google have both said that privacy, yada, yada. Okay. So participation for the moment is completely voluntary. That's where we're at. So for the most part, that fact check was true. I know many of us are skeptical of fact checks, but that one seems to be accurate. Now let's go ahead and look at this other one. This is from fullfact.org. The COVID-19 track and trace app has not been automatically downloaded into people's phones. Claim the NHS, and the NHS is over in the UK, track and trace app is being automatically downloaded onto phones. Conclusion, this is incorrect. What has been added is an API, and this is what we're going to get into in just a second, which will become more important, which can help COVID-19 tracking apps function. The official tracking app is not available in the UK yet, outside of testing in the Isle of Wight. And this is as of just a couple of days ago. So again, they're saying there's a claim going around on Facebook that the NHS COVID-19 track and trace app has been automatically downloaded onto people's phones under the name COVID-19 exposure notifications. We don't have to read the whole thing because it's basically the same other claim, just about the UK app. So then let's go here to how COVID-19 contact tracing works on your phone. This is from Wired from about 2 weeks ago. And most of this I've already covered. We're not going to repeat ourselves. But this is where we get to. What Apple and Google have developed isn't an app itself. Rather, it's an application programming interface, an API. And some of you who develop apps or deal with smartphones a lot will know what API is. Application programming interface, which is kind of like I guess I would describe it as like the bare bones infrastructure to build apps on. And so Apple and Google developed an API plus some other fundamental technologies that other apps can plug into. So for example, when you load up a website with a Google Maps widget on it that is using a Google Maps API, the contact tracing tools work in the same way. So basically they're building the foundation, the structure for coming contact tracing apps, which will be developed by governments and other private companies perhaps. In other words, Apple and Google have done the groundwork, making sure that health apps can talk to each other across Android and iOS and get access to the features they need. It's now up to the countries and states to develop the apps that plug into these foundations and provide the actual front-end interface for users, if indeed they decide to. Some agencies are working on completely bespoke systems of their own. So, and they go into the crucial part of this underlying framework is access to Bluetooth. Bluetooth is perfect for low energy wireless transmission that can run in the background of your phone without draining the battery. Hey, side note, Bluetooth is also dangerous because of EMFs, similar to 5G and other things. Just keep that in your mind. In this case, your phone will be logging onto other phones when it comes into contact with, assuming both your device and the others are running a contact tracing app. So both people have to have the app. At least that's what they're claiming. That's been fully enabled. Now, these logs don't include identifying information. They use random numerical codes that change frequently and get trashed once they're 14 days old. Again, if you want to trust Apple and Google with that, you go right ahead. I'm going to be abandoning my phone by the end of this month. I only recently turned this phone back on to live stream while I'm in Houston, but when I go back to Mexico in a couple weeks, I will not be using these phones anymore. Now let's get to this next story here. Gulf states using COVID-19 contact tracing app as mass surveillance tools, report says. And this is about apps that were developed by Bahrain, the nation Bahrain. I don't know how to pronounce it correctly. I'm sorry. Bahrain's app was linked to a game show designed to shame residents into social distancing. A new study analyzing COVID-19 contact tracing apps conducted by Amnesty International has found that Bahrain and Kuwait are using their public health apps as mass surveillance tools. So to those of you who tell me that this can't happen, here you go. The study analyzed a collection of contact tracing apps which are designed to inform and monitor physical contact between people in the event someone contracts COVID-19. From 11 countries: Algeria, Bahrain, France, Iceland, Israel, Kuwait, Lebanon, Norway, Qatar, Tunisia, and United Arab Emirates. It found 3 particularly egregious apps that collected satellite location data from users, instead of relying simply on Bluetooth signals and matched accounts with real identities. In one extreme cases, some citizens who downloaded the Be Aware Bahrain contact tracing app became contestants on a televised game show, Are You Home? The show involved a host randomly video calling phone numbers of Bahraini individuals using government collected data to check if they were adhering to social distance guidelines. Did you get that? Are You at Home? A game show is calling random numbers from people using government collected data to see, hey, are you actually social distancing? And so by signing up to Be Aware Bahrain, users were automatically enrolled into Are You at Home, which is produced by the state-controlled TV station. So that's just one example. And some will say, oh, well, that's the Middle East, or that's over there. Those are those nations. That's not the U.S. That's not the West. That's not going to happen here. Well, we'll see, right? Now, I want to show you something else. I posted that article on Facebook talking about these apps. And a friend of mine who his name's Lee. Hopefully Lee doesn't mind me putting his face. There's his name right here. But he is I'll just call him a computer whiz, and he's somebody I go to for advice on these topics. And he said this: many of the tracing apps have an API, so any app can get that data. Remember, we just talked about this. And Wired was talking about API. They're talking about application programming interface. It's the foundation which Apple and Google built so that other apps can come along and use it. I asked him, can you elaborate? And Lee says, some of the apps pushed to smartphone in the US have an open API, so other apps on the phone can connect to it for data. Like the location app has an API, so any map application can know where you are, or photo tagging application, or Candy Crush. By default, there is no fencing on apps on a given device. So my interpretation, I said, so this means that other apps can piggyback on the location data gathered and use it for other purposes. And Lee says, yes, this is exactly what that means. So let me just break that down. Although they're claiming that Apple and Google have only built an API, an application programming interface, an app programming interface to build apps on, and that they don't have an actual app, and that it's not tracking anybody and won't be tracking anybody until actual apps are developed. The point that Lee is making here is that if it's gathering location data via Bluetooth, or it's pinpointing your location and, pinging your phone and this and that using their API, that other applications could piggyback on that and could use that data for other reasons, and vice versa. Perhaps that they're claiming that the data is anonymized and that it's just, pinging you whenever you're around certain people who might be infected, but maybe that API itself can still access other API from other devices and gather more information about you, like we're seeing here in this Bahrain example. So my final story here is this piece of crap from Forbes, from this guy, Zach Doffman. Somebody go hit him up on Twitter and tell him how much of a traitor he is to freedom and liberty. Yes, Apple and Google have given us a serious contact tracing problem. Here's why. Now, I'm going to save you the bulk of this. Let me just Control F, mandatory. See how many times this guy calls for mandatory compliance. The hard truth on contact tracing, according to this guy, is that it can be ruthlessly effective, but it requires rules and mandatory compliance. It requires a partnership between a government and its population to root out the virus. It requires access to intrusive data and surveillance technology to back up people's memories, and the progress that can be made by simply placing calls. The even harder truth is that when compliance is optional, when the onus is on members of the public on an almost unimaginable scale to download an app, to follow its demands through likely repeated false alerts, to keep doing that for months, failure is almost certain. And that might be true, but I'm still not willing to trade off my liberties for, making this thing more effective. He says, to make the technology work, it needs to be mandatory. Tracers need access to the raw cellular location data. This needs to be cross-referenced with CCTV and other surveillance, and demands for quarantining or isolation need to be linked to rights to work and travel. Do you guys get this? This guy's saying not only do we need this, mandatory contact tracing apps, and I'm going to show you in a moment, he's saying that there's too much privacy. We need to get rid of privacy because it's making it harder to do the job. But they also need cell phone data, they need CCTV, other surveillance, demands for quarantine or isolation linked to your right to work or travel, which sounds like if you won't be able to work or travel if if they're saying that you have this or something. To make a smartphone app work for the long term, it needs to be mandatory, part of the easing of the lockdown. And here we go, QR codes to travel and to work, to access venues and stores. If you've come into contact with someone newly infected, those codes are withdrawn until you are tested, which means you wouldn't have the right to travel or work because your QR code would be removed. Those apps may use Bluetooth, although the actual effectiveness of this as a mass-scale proximity tool is unproven, but it can also ping GPS, and GPS is even more invasive than Bluetooth is. And Let me just search privacy real quick and show you guys how much this guy hates privacy. More and more countries are now deploying apps built around the standard platform. Privacy has become the central issue. This means the onus is on effective manual tracking and tracing. And so he's saying we need to learn lessons from Singapore, and we need more intrusive measures. So he said we need compulsory data gathering. He's highlighting Singapore, Israel, and China as examples of that we should follow. And here he goes again. As things settle, we see the feedback from the early weeks of the new app. We find ourselves deciding to either use technology to fight the spread of the virus, accepting privacy and freedom compromises, or to prioritize those protections. And so he keeps basically reiterating that if we let privacy be a thing, then it's not going to work. And he said that leads us to the real issue in the Google Apple takeover of the whole smartphone contact tracing ecosystem. It has put privacy before efficacy. And like I said, I'm even doubtful that they're really, being so strong on privacy. But he's sitting here saying, let's be very clear. You can prioritize privacy or you can prioritize fighting the spread of the infection. You can't have it both ways. So this guy is pretty certain that, we need to remove privacy as far as he's concerned. And again, he highlights China, Singapore, and Israel. And he says this: the fact is that their model, Apple and Google, is flawed because it has become secondary to the privacy bandwagon. I mean, this guy really hates privacy. And this is a writer for Forbes. He's not a politician, so he doesn't necessarily have power, but he has influence. And this article is going out there. It's got 5,000 views. It's probably been, reposted and reblogged elsewhere. And it's getting into the minds of people that we can't have privacy if we want to stop this. And he talked about QR codes to work or travel, talked about removing them. And this brings me to a report I did a few weeks ago. Immunity passports are coming to airlines. Will you still fly? Immunity passports, digital certificates, QR codes. These are the kinds of things people like Bill Gates and others have floated and have been talking about. These are the kind of things that we heard about in the Rockefeller Foundation document from 2010, Lockstep. This is the kind of things that we heard about in Event 201, which was funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the World Economic Forum. This is where we are headed, guys. This is the truth about contact tracing. So I hope that this was somewhat informative for you guys. There are no apps right now, at least not in the US. Apparently there might be a UK app, but they are uploading APIs onto people's phones automatically via iPhones and Androids. And at least in some states in the Gulf, they are being used for surveillance. And there are people in mainstream press like Forbes calling for less privacy, calling for QR codes to travel and work. I mean, this is where we're headed. So just to reiterate, the contact tracing apps aren't out yet in the United States. They are coming. But yes, your phone did update to make it easier for those apps when they develop. And at the moment, those apps could potentially be being used. The API could be used by other apps that are already out there. So, or vice versa. My point is that we shouldn't just trust, wholesale and blindly trust these people that they're protecting our privacy, because they don't have a track record that, lends themselves towards credibility. So I hope this was informative. If you liked it, please do like, follow, share, subscribe, all that good stuff. Wherever you're watching, I hope you're watching on Float.app or on Minds or on Hive, somewhere other than YouTube or Facebook. But even if you're not, I appreciate you guys listening. This is what I do Monday through Friday, Monday through Sunday, try to bring you important information. And the only way I can do it is with your support through Patreon, through PayPal. And of course, if you follow my work and you share it, that means more than anything. So thank you guys so much. Remember, you are powerful, you are beautiful, and you are free. Peace.